The first thing I want to address today is the Renaissance and whether or not the question of whether it happened or did not happen. Now, there are some individuals who may think that the Renaissance did not happen. This is an attempt to try to look at that situation. The Renaissance, first off, is basically the rebirth, and of course, coined this term is going to be coined after the Renaissance has happened, which is fairly typical. Now, the Renaissance is rebirth because many of the scholars or intellectuals of the time believed that the Middle Ages were a dark time because they're comparing the Greek and Roman civilizations to what was existing in Europe at that time. And in their point of view, the Middle Ages was a dark time as they perceived that there wasn't a great deal of intellectual or discoveries activity going on at that time. There was, but it had not compared to a big picture sort of event like the Roman Empire, for example. So, what was going on during the early modern period, at least in Europe, was that they were going out and they were rediscovering the ancient Greek and Roman writings. And this is in part what they were finding in Europe itself, but through trade and relationships with other groups in northern Africa or what we might call today the Middle East. They're able to get their hand onto Greek translated writings from that part of the world. So with these writings, they found and rediscovered many different features that we will see in the Renaissance. For example, the rediscovery of arches and domes, or how to create statues. They already had statues, but more of the classical type that we generally might see if you look into ancient Greece during the classical period, or even some of the Roman statues. So you have a rediscovery of art, rediscovery of technology, a rediscovery in part of language, and a lot of different political systems, and there was debates going on in this ancient world about government types and how to solve issues. There were military sort of issues going on at the time. So you had a pretty wide and broad spread of intellectual activity during the ancient period, and that was coming back to light as far as the Europeans were concerned at this time during the early modern period. So then we come to the issue of, did the Renaissance happen? Well, first off, yes, it did. Now, the argument for it did not happen was it did not affect a majority of the people in Europe. And to a point, you can go along with that argument. Yes, most of the population in Europe at this time of the 14, 15, 1600s, even later, most of the population was not literate. They could not read and write. And so that certainly limited the amount of information they could obtain at that period of time. So the argument is that since the population did not know how to read and write, and they weren't really concerned with intellectual activities because they could not absorb that information because it wasn't available to them, then therefore the Renaissance did not occur. Well, the general public at that time, their main concern was surviving, getting food. 90% of the population at this period of time was trying to farm, get food in that manner. We had not quite gotten to an industrial age where we start to see that shift quite yet during the early modern period. So most people were concerned about farming, having kids, and making ends meet and providing for their families in one manner or another. And certainly much of the population was concerned with religion as well, which is going to get messy during the early modern period due to Martin Luther and much of the schisms going on in the church. But that's a different issue that we won't speak of here. So much of the population was concerned about those events. But that's not to say that the Renaissance didn't occur. Much of the benefits from the Renaissance, for example, the expansion of languages, rediscovery of arches and domes, that's going to lay the field work for quite a few of the buildings that are going to be created during this time period. They're going to start making things more out of stone rather than wood, so they're going to be permanent fixtures. You're also going to eventually down the road, with some of these ancient writings, rediscover much of the navigational routes that the ancients had discovered during their period of time. And so the Europeans are going to use that information as well as building bigger ships and durable ships, so then they can then move those ships and discover and make many of these maps eventually more accurate than they were when they first rediscovered them. And that exchange is going to bring a lot of an exchange of trade, a lot more food, as well as more luxury goods like spices are going to be brought into much of Europe. And so as a result, much of the general population is going to benefit from this. In this time period, and in some cases this is also true today, if the rich, wealthy, and the powerful are motivated to produce libraries or produce buildings that they can be proud of, and maybe the population can be proud of as well, and they get interested in some of these other facets that they're rediscovering, for example, exploring the world and getting more raw materials, exploring the world, getting more cultures and more exotic and exciting factors within Europe. The general population is going to benefit as a direct result of that. So eventually down the road, you're going to get the age of exploration, you're going to get colonization of North America, South America, as well as many other different continents. You're going to have sugar and salt and pepper and various other different spices coming into these countries at a very cheap rate because they're coming in mass quantities. And so, as a gradual result, this is all a consequence of the Renaissance. And so, while the general population isn't going to benefit immediately from much of these rediscoveries or inventions that come out of the Renaissance, they will eventually benefit from it in one way or another. Much of the general population will then eventually rediscover many of these writings down the line. It's not going to be immediate, but after a couple centuries, they will benefit from these writings, and they certainly benefited from these kingdoms and countries expanding their power, trying to obtain these spices, trying to gain power, and they're going to benefit from that economically. Their well-being is going to expand and establish, as many of the medical discoveries are going to be brought from India and China and various other different locations. So the Renaissance did occur. That's going to happen much faster for the very wealthy, or at least they're going to benefit from it far quicker than maybe the general population. But overall, much of Europe is going to benefit from the Renaissance one way or another at some point in time or another. So there you go.